Good afternoon and welcome to the Yorkshire Museum. My name's Lucy and I'm one of the curators here. And I'd like to welcome you to the fourth and final online talk of this series, which is focused on our fantastic prehistoric collections here at the Yorkshire Museum. Today I'm going to focus on two very special objects from our archaeological collection. They're known as the Towton Torcs, and they are truly items of Brigantian bling. You can see they're made of beautiful gold here. These are incredibly rare objects, and they're very significant for Yorkshire. In fact, they transform our understanding of Yorkshire, this area of Yorkshire, in the Iron Age, and we'll come on to why they do that a little bit later. First, I wanted to talk to you about their discovery. Their discovery is quite an interesting story. Like many of the objects in our archaeological collection, they weren't actually found by archaeologists at all. They were found by members of the public, metal detectorists, who found them in the bed of a stream, strangely, near Towton, which is a small village near Tadcaster in North Yorkshire. Intriguingly, the two objects weren't discovered together. They were actually discovered a whole year apart on two completely separate occasions. However, we don't think this is a coincidence. The types of objects that they are, their similarities, and the fact that they're so rare in this region, these are the only two examples known, it all suggests that they were originally buried together in the ground. So they were found by metal detectorists, and they were recorded with the Portable Antiquities Scheme, which is a national body which records members of archaeological finds made by members of the public. And because of the age of these objects and their material, their precious metal, their gold, they're known as what we call treasure. That means that they need to be declared, and the museum that is most local to where these objects were found is given the opportunity to acquire them. And we fundraised heavily for these back in 2011 and 2012, thanks to many generous donations by members of the public and a generous grant from the Arts Council England through their V&A purchase grant scheme. We were able to secure these for the people of Yorkshire. And when you come back to the Yorkshire Museum to visit us, you'll be able to see these pride of place on display. So what are they? I'm talking about torcs, that's the type of objects that they are, but what is a torc? Well, essentially it's a piece of Iron Age jewellery. More typically, a large torc would be worn around the neck as a neck ring. However, you can see from the size of these that these are made to be worn around the wrist or arm, kind of bracelets or armlets. So torcs were a very distinctive type of later Iron Age jewellery or dress accessory. They broadly date to the 1st century BC. They're found across Europe. However, we clearly liked them a lot here in Britain, as around a third of all known torcs are found in Britain. There's a cluster of these, especially around East Anglia. The people who were living in East Anglia during the Iron Age seem to particularly prefer to wear this type of dress, and we'll come on to that and what that means a little bit later. So torcs are made of different styles, using different materials, and as I've said, in different sizes. So the image that you can see on your screen now is another Yorkshire torc. This one isn't in the Yorkshire Museum's collections, unfortunately. It's in the collections of Sheffield Museums, and this example was found in South Yorkshire near Dinnington, which is near Rotherham. As you can see, even though it's the same type of object, it's very different. It's much, much larger. It's very, very heavy and large, made to be worn around the neck. It's also made of different materials. Although it's very ornate and highly decorative, it's made of copper alloy and iron, so less precious materials. Let's have a little look at how these two spectacular objects were constructed. So torcs were made by twisting pieces of rods of gold or other materials together. And we'll look at these two objects in turn, as they're both, although they have many similarities, they're both rather different. This is the simpler of the two torcs. It's made by simply twisting together two strands of gold, which have then been looped together at the end to form these beautiful looped terminals. These would have been soldered together in place, and you can actually see a couple of droplets of solder that have been dripped onto the body of the armlet So very beautiful, but quite simple in design. However, if we take a look at the second Torc, you can see that it's made of more elements and it's much more complex in this design. It's made of 4 strands of gold that have been in pairs twisted together and then plaited together to make this really rather complex form. The loop terminals are also more complex and more effort, shall we say, has gone into their crafting. So if you look at the interior, hopefully our cameras can pick up this tiny detail, you can see that they're made of 2 strands of gold. However, looking at the exterior, very small amounts of gold solder have been added so that they appear actually as a single continuous loop. So both of these objects and the larger Torcs that are obviously made of more materials would have taken a great level of skill and craftspersonship to make. We don't know a huge amount of detail about who would have worn these objects and how. This is mostly because for the majority of the British Iron Age, we don't have lots of evidence from graves. People aren't being buried in elaborate tomb monuments with their finery like they were in the preceding Bronze Age. So most finds of Torcs are disassociated from their context of wear. They're usually found in hoards, for instance, or by metal detectorists. So we have to fill in the gaps, I suppose, as to how these were worn and used. However, we can infer that they were worn by very important people in Iron Age society, possibly royalty, important warriors, and we can infer this because of the rich materials that they're made with and the level and time that would have gone into their construction. Perhaps it might be useful to discuss Iron Age society a little bit more broadly to place who might have worn the Towton Torcs into context. So when we talk about the Iron Age, we're talking about the period that dates roughly from 800 BC up to the invasion of the Romans in the 1st century AD. It's named the Iron Age because it's the first time that a new material, iron, was used on a large scale. Now, the people of Iron Age Britain kind of banded together into communities, into groups of people that we traditionally refer to as tribes, and each tribe would have a tribal territory that they kind of oversaw and operated within. There were just under 30 tribes that lived across Britain during the Iron Age. Now, most of the north of England, including most of Yorkshire, was occupied by a tribe known as the Brigantes. They occupied a vast territory, by far the largest tribal territory in Iron Age Britain, that stretched from the Humber all the way up to the Tyne, absolutely huge expanse of countryside. And we know that the Brigantes and the other tribes across Britain would have been hierarchical, so not everybody held the same status. They would have had kings, queens, famous warriors, and it's those types of people that would have likely worn objects like this. The majority of the Iron Age population, the majority of the Brigantes would have been farmers living off the land, living a fairly simple lifestyle, but objects like this show us that their rulers really like to show off their elaborate dress and their wealth. And really, to call objects like these Torcs jewellery really plays down their importance. They had a really important social role. They would have been worn, perhaps similar in a way to perhaps royalty wear crowns today for ceremonial occasions. These would have been sending out a message to wider society that their owner was of great importance. So we've talked about the objects themselves. Let's talk a little bit about their discovery and what that adds to the story. So as I mentioned, they were found by metal detectorists on 2 occasions a year apart, and they were both found in the bed of a stream. This is very unusual. The other Torcs that are known from Britain and on the continent, there are some trends that can be gauged from their find spots. so they're more commonly discovered away from settlements and rivers, and they're often found in hordes, so groups of Torcs that have been gathered together and buried for whatever reason. In terms of where they're geographically sited, they're often sited on hills, upland slopes, kind of areas of notable interest in the landscape. So the fact that these were found in a stream bed is quite unusual. It's actually much more likely that perhaps these were once part of a horde, buried together as part of a horde, that has then later in history been eroded by a stream which has dispersed these objects. To understand why beautiful objects like this might have been buried together in a horde, it's perhaps useful to look at other examples from Britain. There's a fantastic series of hordes of Torcs known as the Snettisham hordes. Snettisham is a site near King's Lynn on the north coast of Norfolk. And over a period of some 70 years, many hundreds of Torcs have been discovered, a really spectacular sight. Now the image that you can see right now is a photograph of one of those hordes under excavation, and you can see the wealth that is included in just this single small pit. Many different types of gold Torc, many different sizes, including armlets like our Towton Torcs, and some of them really, really elaborate. So we've discussed that this more simple Torc is made of 2 strands, are slightly more complex of 4 strands, while some of the Snettisham Torcs are made of up to 64 individual strands of gold which have been bound together. Really spectacular items. And as I mentioned earlier, there seems to have been a real taste, a real custom for wearing Torcs of great wealth and beauty in East Anglia, so in that eastern part of Britain. The tribes, so the peoples that lived in that area, were known as the Iceni, made famous by their warrior queen Boudica, who rebelled against the Romans in the 1st century AD. It seems like Iceni royalty and Iceni people who were important in Iceni society really treasured, really favoured wearing treasures like the Snettisham Torcs, and that was a really important way to show off their wealth and status. Interestingly, there are similarities between our Towton Torcs and Torcs from Snettisham. The image that you can see on your screen right now is one of the Torcs from Snettisham, and you can see that it holds many similarities in the construction and style of our Torcs, with this twisted band and looped terminals. Archaeologists have even suggested that these Torcs from Towton may have been made by perhaps the same jeweller who made some of the Snettisham Torcs, and that's really quite interesting, and it perhaps gives us a glimpse into tribal politics in the Iron Age. So why are these objects so exciting and so significant to Yorkshire's history? Well, they really transform our understanding of Yorkshire in the Iron Age. Before these were discovered, we didn't know that the Brigantes liked to display their wealth and status using precious metals. These Torcs are in fact the first evidence of Iron Age gold in Yorkshire and the north of England. That makes them incredibly significant. And then furthermore, those possible links to the Snettisham hoard might suggest relationships between the Brigantes and the Iceni tribe. These might have been passed between the two groups through exchange, or perhaps even as a diplomatic gift. These might be the surviving evidence of an alliance between those two tribes. So I think that these little gold Torcs have a fantastic story to tell. I hope you agree. If you do have any questions about these Torcs or our wider Iron Age collections, please do comment on our social media. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. I've really enjoyed sharing these spectacular objects with you today. I'm pleased to let you know that the Yorkshire Museum will be reopening again on Friday the 8th of April. I encourage you to come and see the Towton Torcs, see our fantastic exhibitions here, and also come and visit our brand new exhibition, The Rydale Hoard, A Roman Mystery, where we will be telling the fantastic story of the most exciting acquisition that this museum has made in a number of years. If you've enjoyed these online talks, you'll be able to tune in to many more online talks next year. We're going to be having kind of in-depth collections-focused curator talks, just like this one. And we're also going to be having a series of external expert lectures. So I hope to see you at the Yorkshire Museum from April and online as well. Thank you very much.